Good evening, everyone. Welcome. And I want to say thank you for being here with us tonight on this special holiday evening. And happy Memorial Day to everybody out there. If you're not out watching fireworks and you're here to listen, thank you very much. Thanks for being with us. So, I have a return very special guest with us tonight, of course, as you know. He is a retired Army Sergeant, uh, special special forces intelligence officer, William Kotel. And I want to know if everybody can hear me okay. Let me know if you can hear me okay. Because if you can't, um, maybe I'm being toyed with tonight. Anyway, I want to say happy Memorial Day. And I really, really have a few things to catch you up on here. So let's get into this. First of all, um, no, I can't yet. Um, all right. First of all, welcome. And I just want to say thank you all for the love regarding the song today. I hope you enjoyed that. If you didn't catch that, tribute to all of our people, um, to everybody that's been in service for us, and especially that song was written by inspiration from spirit by a whole bunch of spirit soldiers, literally, that came to me one day. I was running up the stairs to write it down. And this song was a very special tribute for the wives and the children that were left behind because of this. And so it's a special, special song. Um, and I really wanted to share that with you. I just, I just really wanted you to um, know that this came as inspiration and it was meant for this day, literally. And it came to me as an insight by the spirit of fallen soldiers. That makes me want to cry again, but honestly, that's the truth. And I've spent an awful lot of time in my life, makes me really emotional, sorry. I spent a lot of time in my life walking those cemeteries, um, and just putting focus and love there, sitting quietly and meditating for hours at times, and just listening. And so means a lot to me to share that with you and that you can get the message and you receive it. So thank you. Thank you for listening. And I'm glad you enjoyed that. Today, I have a special shout out before we begin. I meant to do this a few times now, but you see this? You know what this is? This is our buddy Lance's super algae oil, lemon flavored. It's good for raising your DHA levels in your body, and it's the new lemon flavor, and it's awesome. So if you haven't gotten that, you go to Making Life Brighter and you can find the algae oil link and click there and go look for the lemon flavored algae oil. It's new and it's awesome, and it raises your DHA levels, which raises the light in your body. It raises, helps to heal your nervous system. It helps to extend your telomere growth, all of that. So I just really, really want to share that with you. That's an awesome link. So you can go to Making Life Brighter for the link there. Thank you, everybody. Hello, hello, hello. Hello to everybody. It's nice to have you here. Glad that everybody is here and you can hear me. That's awesome. We're going to bring Sergeant Kotel in just a minute. And first of all, he has a very special drop for you tonight, and it's incredibly timely on top of it. So, whoo, yeah, that algae oil lemon stuff is good. I've been giving it to Opal, not the lemon flavored one, but the regular one, and it's helped her a lot in her recovery. So, today I posted that I had these flybys of these military helicopters, and it might have just been mere coincidence, of course, that they were just flying over my space to the point where I could see their faces and they could see mine, and that they came. Um, it was weird. So, and it came a few times anyway, and that was even more interesting. So, when you know, you know. I want to go back to a little bit of a drop that I had the other day with you, and that drop is a post that someone put on Facebook, and that post is of a robbery that took place at Lululemon, and the guy posted it saying that he's no longer going to let his kids shop in that store, as if he's punishing the store. Well, I wrote to him and I said, if you had the grammar, um, the employees that you're going to give money to, he's going to donate money to the people that got fired because someone came in to rob the store. The employees tried to thwart the robber. And then because they tried to thwart the robber, they got fired immediately. Now, they were told not to call the police because the company policy is not to call the police. And that's the craziness we're in today. So he's like, what's happening to our world? I'm not going to let my kids shop there anymore. And I'm going to find those employees and I'm going to pay them. Okay. But the which is what we're getting at here and why we keep turning this down is that those, if they had the life claim and could use the grammar, they would be able to file back in to their employer challenging the company policy. The company policy being that they can't involve the police, and then looking at the government policy of why this is happening to begin with. Why is this allowed in a store in, say, New York City or something? Why is this allowed at all? How is it that people are getting away with thievery and robbery left, right, and center, and there's nothing that anyone can do about it? That doesn't make any sense. Stores are going to go out of business because random looters are going to come along under the jurisdiction of martial law and they can do anything. So if you don't start filing in with your quantum claimant actual grammatical paperwork, you're going up against a ghost in the machine. And the ghost in the machine needs to come back out and get basically sucked up by the vacuum cleaner called grammar because it needs correction. And so that was the post I wanted to put up. But YouTube has been giving me a little fit in the start lately. And they aren't letting me post pictures and all kinds of fun things are happening. So I'm just telling you now, that's what took place the other day that I tried to get out to you. And it is that the man saw the problem, he doesn't know the solution. And the solution has been stated in the I told him one day, even in your own businesses, you should be doing this because you should set the terms for whatever happens in your business. But these corporations are getting away with it, and they're being guided or misguided by fraudulent law firms that are basically allowing this to take place. So what happens if the whole nation has an issue like this where in fact you can't go to work because you might get robbed or you have no jurisdiction if you're part of that and then you get fired? How does that work? So, yeah, that's kind of crazy. Well, it doesn't have to be crazy. There's a solution on the table. There is. It's there. We just need to stand on that solution and help educate other people as to how they can stand on that solution. So, happy Memorial Day, Arcade. Happy Memorial Day, everybody. Hello, 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 hello. And I'm happy to have you here. So, let's go jolly together. And I have a very special guest with us tonight. And I have a special tribute to him too. But let's bring him on. What do you say? I want you to ask your questions after we're done presenting today when it comes down to what he's talking about because he has a lot to say and it's kind of timely. Like I said, it's going to fit into the previous talk we did, and if you didn't hear that, you need to go back and listen to it. So welcome to Making Life Brighter, everybody, and please welcome back Sergeant William Kotel, who is a former intelligence officer for CENTCOM. He is a retired Army sergeant, and he was part of the whole Benghazi theater. We talked about that. He gave us a warning last time about Maduro and Venezuela, and he had told you about his filings and what he'd done and how those filings actually changed or didn't change the framework of what's been going on. So, William, welcome back. Can you hear me? Because I can't hear you. I still don't hear him. Hopefully, we can hear him. Are you there? Can you hear me? No, I can't hear him. Interesting. We can't hear you. Can anybody hear William? No, we can't hear him. Let's see if we can do it this way. I don't know how well it's going to work, guys. But let's see if we can do this. He's saying he can't hear me, but must be some technical issue on his end because let's see if we can do it this way instead. We'll see if it doesn't give feedback, okay? We'll try this way. You guys tell me if it sounds okay to you.
Now can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you guys hear him? You all hear him? Go ahead and speak, William.
If you can hear me, please let her know so we can have a good show.
You just have to talk up loud. Nope. You still can't hear him? Keep talking, William.
I can't be heard at all by them or you?
I can hear you.
Okay. Are they able to hear me from the phone?
We're trying to figure that out. Can you guys hear him on the phone? Yes, they said. Somebody said yes.
Good, good, good. That's good news.
Tell us if you can't hear him, okay? Tell them if you can't hear him. William, they can hear you.
Yes.
Okay. We're going to have this conversation then like this. Okay.
It works.
It works. That's all that matters. It works. So, okay, everybody. First of all, I want to just shout out a super thank you to you for your service, for everything that you've ever done in all of your service, and specifically even for these filings that you're trying to put through and the awareness that you've made over the years, William. And I want to say a super personal thank you and shout out because years ago when I interviewed William first, we were talking about all the theater upcoming and COVID hadn't come to pass yet. But what happened is I got bit by an AI dragonfly and I almost died. And it's William that reached out to me strangely and said, "Are you okay?" Meaning he could sense or feel that something was off with me. And yes, I said, I'm something's very wrong because I was coughing frantically and coughing up blood almost within about a minute of that thing biting me. And it hurt. It hurt a lot. It was crazy. Yep, it was true. And he gave me some things to do for that. He helped me through that essentially in a very practical and also kind of an esoteric way. And he gave me some things to get the very dark energy off of me that was on me. And then with that, I was able to heal, but it almost did me in. That was insane. So William, I have a little feedback on your end. All right. So
is it too bad or is it okay?
It should be okay. Let's try and just bring you in here, okay? So I'm just saying thank you personally for basically saving my life. And really, I hand that to you because I have a picture, guys, of what happened that day. He told me to go ahead and crack an egg open, rub it on my body and crack an egg open and get rid of the bad energy. And I thought that was crazy, but at the time I would do anything. And you know what? If I showed you a picture of that, it would freak you out. What showed up in that glass was like, whoa, that is some weird energy. So it actually helped me. And so RK is saying thank you. I don't know if you can see the feed, William. If you're still in there, you should still be in there.
I can't see it while I'm talking to you on the regular phone. I'm sorry.
All right. So we'll carry on. Let's get started. I just want to say thank you for all that you've done. And I want to talk about that AI dragonfly for a second because AI is out of control. And I've talked about the AI lawsuit here before. And they're saying thank you to you for saving my life, William. But the AI
Very kind.
the AI is out of control. And I talked about how when we started those interviews, we were talking about the filing of the AI lawsuit as well. And that involved citing Obama, the Chinese government, everybody under the sun is in that AI lawsuit. It was filed in fiction grammar, but it was filed nonetheless and cited everyone for organ harvesting, AI out of control now through dragonflies and bots and all kinds of things, that it was basically out of control. And then I subsequently got bit by this thing that followed me around in the pool and then more or less attacked me. And then I just, oh my God, I've never had anything like that happen. So we have a problem on our hands in a variety of ways, that being one of them. And William, I'd like to just kind of bring you in here and talk about that for a minute, because you were the one that actually alerted me that the big C word was coming down the pike. And you were the one that said, you have so many days before this is going to hit. I just found out, and here's what's coming, and here's what you need to do. And sure enough, it came down the pike. It was a shocking event, but you had your ear to the ground and you heard what was going down, or coming up, rather. Now we're fast forward several years ahead. You've just filed these things. Let's start with your filing. You showed me the receipt that you got of the filing after we broadcast the show. What happened?
Well, I filed a mandamus court document in the federal court of law in Tampa, Florida. The filing was dismissed by Judge Barber before my copies even reached the White House to notify them that I'm suing them. And what I'm suing them for is dereliction of duty. Okay, there's national security. Venezuela is the source of multiple things wrong with the United States worldwide. First and foremost, everybody sees on the news is the immigrations matter. You know, we're getting these immigrants going crazy at the border. Well, there's 7.1 million refugees that fled Venezuela from the tyranny of Maduro. None of these South and Central American countries were getting a lot of support from the United States from Trump's time to now even, which was very unusual, but they were taking their riffraff and shoving them forward and pushing them north. So our border was being inundated and flooded. Now Mexico is letting them sit on the border. They tried to stop some, but not many. We're not really working with our South and Central American allies to kind of quell this problem. But it stems back to Venezuela. Now, Venezuela is also host to human rights violations, murder, to maintain Maduro's power. You know, that's not been addressed by the United Nations or other countries that are like the United States and others. And right now we face even more crises with our adversaries living and hanging out with Maduro in Venezuela. You're talking Russia, China, Iran. And then you've got all those wonderful cartels, which Maduro is the head of the Sun Cartel. And then you have terrorist groups, both Sunni and Shia. And when I say that, what I mean is Al-Qaeda/ISIS, Sunni, and Hezbollah and others, Shia. And Shia are backed by Iran. And they're all operating freely over there. So there's a whole litany of things that are going on. And P.S., you know, Venezuela is also the number one producer of oil in the American hemisphere. And we have a lot of problems.
Well, William, let's talk a minute about your filing specifically. So what did you receive back?
Well, a day after filing my notice to the federal court, my mandamus, it was shut down by the presiding judge, Judge Barber. He just sent a notification saying he's not entertaining this. And he made some kind of chide comment to me in regards to how it was written. In my filings, I added as one of my examples a prior mandamus that I did against the Afghanistan withdrawal, which was completely illegal under U.S. law on many things that were done. And that wasn't heard, and that's still in limbo in the Supreme Court of the United States. They haven't sent it back to me, and it won't go forward thanks to some woman in review named Lisa Nesbitt. Anyways, I hadn't even received the green notice back saying that the White House had received a copy of this mandamus before Judge Barber sent his notification that this is being dismissed before it ever begins. So the White House did receive a copy. I sent a copy of that to Ms. Adams so that she understood that the White House did receive a copy, but there's no signature there. There's just a number code. And I want to make it clear that there is an offside to this. If the White House did look at that mandamus and decided to act on it, they would actually look pretty good, to be quite honest. But that's their choice. Again, you can't make anybody in the White House or in Congress or Senate do much of anything these days. You can't even email them or call them anymore. Once they're voted into office, it's like the ivory towers of these, truly high-speed college professors that think they're all that in a bag of chips. But the point being is that there are laws on the books, the Constitution being the number one primary, and then federal law, and then, of course, military law. And a lot of these are being violated on a regular basis, and there's no one holding anyone accountable for it. So we're just not even following our own rules, regulations, or laws, and we've allowed our country to dip down to the lowest level possible. We're no longer oil independent. We're no longer natural gas independent. Our economy's in the toilet. Our kids in school aren't learning the correct, curriculum. These groups are allowed to go around the country, different groups like Antifa being one and many others, and commit violent acts and get away with it. Looting, mugging, robbing, shooting seems to be a constant pattern that goes on, and no one's arresting any of the criminals. Matter of fact, they're holding regular citizens accountable, which is outrageous. No one's ever heard of that. So this is why the founding fathers, with the Constitution, recommended many things, one of them being Second Amendment laws, another one being the First Amendment, of course, freedom of speech and freedom of assembly, but to a point where it doesn't impact others, and other things like, Fourth Amendment, search and seizure laws, Fifth Amendment, the right to represent yourself. So, and not self-incriminate. I think we've come to a stage and a point where there's a turning. And now it's looking like regular people are finally figuring out what avenues to take to correct this, to say we've had enough. It doesn't matter who you vote for. It doesn't matter what party you're supporting. None of them are doing anything. They provide nothing but lip service, talk, and nothing is done. And this is why it's so scary. And what's worse is people are really the ones suffering more than anyone else. So that's why this whole Venezuela thing, which is another big problem for everybody, is so impactful to the United States. And by the way, this is one way, if we took down Maduro and his cronies, is one way to help the Ukrainians in their war with Russia and to slow China's, rolling all over everybody down a little bit. This is a very important matter that really should have been resolved years ago under President Trump and never was. And this COVID really was an excuse to get out of jail free, to not do any of your jobs. And that was not, it's just simply not the case. COVID was not as bad as what it was put out to be. And then the right, tools and medications and other things that were out there were not allowed to be used. So it was like an intentional action to shut everybody down, put them in their homes, and control the populace.
All the while they put up 5G towers everywhere while you were sleeping and not looking.
It just allowed for very bad things to happen to people around the world, and especially in the United States.
Especially here. Well, when you can't even go shopping in a store anymore peaceably because you're afraid of looters, and then there's there's no help in sight, and there's no recourse. That's a problem. We have, William, a series of people here that are also in the quantum grammar world. I'm going to propose this. I'll have to talk to you about this later, but William would have to get a claim of the life to do this technically, but I propose that we take that document he sent me, and whoever wants to help me, we can go through page by page and syntax it and even rewrite that page and show what that would be. If he filed that back on them, it might have an impact in the Supreme Court immediately. Anyone want to help? So I'm putting that out there as a challenge for anyone out there who's sitting in the audience in grammar. But William, let's talk about Maduro. Let's talk about how important today's date really is.
Well, today is an unusual day. Maduro has flown down to Brazil, and he's meeting with Lula Silva, the president of Brazil. Now, anybody who knows anything about Brazil and Brazilian politics, little Mr. Silva there was arrested and charged with corruption for billions of dollars gone missing from his government coffers for various projects that were favorable to him and his party. And he was removed. But apparently someone at their Supreme Court released him of the charges and allowed him to go back in as president. So now, as of today's date, Maduro's down there with Silva, both discussing how they can get rid of United States and other coalition assets embargoes on Venezuela and to fight back against the United States. Again, these are words of threats against the United States not being taken seriously. But if you back up in history just a little bit, in the month of March, there was what's called the Iberio America meeting. That meeting was a South and Central American meeting of multiple countries. Maduro was invited. Argentina and several other countries had planned to arrest Maduro when he went. So Maduro caught wind of it through his intelligence apparatuses and wound up not going. His excuse was he had COVID-19. That's not true. He just avoided being arrested. But now he's down in Brazil with a corrupt president in Brazil that doesn't favor the United States at all. So we have to ask ourselves, how many allies are being construed that are undermining the United States and other South and Central American countries? In the last episode we talked about, Nicaragua was one of those impacted and arrested 222 Catholics, one of them being an archbishop, and sentenced them to 26 years in jail. And Cuba has become emboldened, and their refugee status has gone off the charts because of how emboldened they've become against harming their own citizens and maintaining communistic controls. Now, there's other countries that are starting to lean one way or the other, and terrorist groups are starting to flourish. Cartels are flourishing and have been. So when does this madness stop? When does the United States get back involved with them? Because one of the things I talked about was, when I talked to the White House folks and I talked to the United Nations American side Security Council folks last year about the fact Maduro threatened the United States with military force and said we can do a police action back then. 1 week after I spoke to them, the Department of State sent representatives down and they talked to Maduro.
Because of you.
I'm sorry?
Because of you.
Well, apparently so. I must be at fault for that, so I apologize. But the point is Maduro is not the lawful leader of Venezuela. Juan Guaido. Why would the Department of State not Juan Guaido? See, so I made a complaint over the weekend, that weekend back in March of last year. IG complaint was completed. On Monday, then the State Department issued an apology that they had spoken to him. But they used an excuse that they got these hostages that Venezuela had, 9 of them. 7 of them were Texaco and other oil company employees. 2 of them worked for a company called Silver Corps, which is like a paramilitary company that was trying to help Guaido reestablish control of Venezuela. Not very effectively. But the point is that those release of those hostages didn't negate the fact that we dealt with a known murderer who has killed thousands of his own citizens. They processed the bodies to not be found by any commission and created a 7+ million refugee problem and is running cartels, terrorist groups, and Russia, China, and Iran are adversaries right out of his own country and shutting down oil to everybody.
Let me interrupt you there, William. I just want to put a stamp on what he said the last time and bring to your attention that after that last talk that we had, they had busloads of people they were processing in New York City and displacing others in order to process these people in old hotels and so on. Well, they've since shipped them upstate. And what's really strange is last week, I seem to have like this strange time warp last week. And one evening I was looking at a bottle of supplements that I had, and I looked on the back and I was looking for the content of it, and the maker of it was by Gould Manufacturing or something like that out of Wyoming. And I thought that was very strange. And at the same time, they were showing how they were claiming states of emergency in upstate New York because they were about to land all these people upstate. And so one of the cities, Cortland, the mayor there is David Gould, of all things. And David Gould was ready to protest this, as well as Cuyahoga County and all that. Now, let's give a little context to this history. Interestingly enough, they're landing people all over upstate New York. Well, the Bidens used to have residents there, and the Bidens, Joe Biden went to Syracuse University. Joe Biden showed up in upstate New York recently in Syracuse because they're putting in a new multi-million-dollar company that has to do with some kind of high tech. And he showed up to speak about that. And so there's a whole thing going on in New York State. And what William said before just landed on the doorstep almost overnight. And very strange events are happening. But go ahead, William. Let's bring this back to the history of Brazil and why the monies were landed in Brazil in the first place and why these two gentlemen might be getting together.
Well, let me go back in history. I hate to have your viewers or listeners not understand the context of this, so let me go back. Back in 2011, 2012, this kid came out named Snowden, okay? He exposed supposedly this horrific program the United States government and the British government was doing. And at that time, President Obama was in, Panetta was CIA guy, Clapper was the NSA guy, all of this. Well, what Snowden had done is he had grabbed a bunch of documents that were classified as a little private in the Navy, basically like a little E2, E3, whatever, and presented this to the Brazilian media because they're the only ones that had listened to him. And when they did, and they heard what he had to say, his words were simple. The British and the United States governments are listening to every phone call, looking at every email and every text message everybody in Brazil is sending. And from that, he wound up doing an HBO show. These guys in the White House at the time, Panetta and Clapper and General Dempsey, they did not slam this guy and put out an anti-slogan campaigning hard enough. And they never bothered to go back to Brazil to rest assured, Brazil, we're on your side. That's not true. Because literally it's not true. It's not feasible to even think about, 215 million people's emails, phone calls, everything. I mean, that's ridiculous. So they allowed that story to proliferate, and they gave credit to a guy that's nothing more than an idiot. That right there set the tone for the country of Brazil. In 2013, 2 years later, or a year and a half later, I had a mission to go against a guy named Rafi Asawi. Rafi Asawi is a Sunni. He was the former Minister of Finance in Iraq. He stole $12 billion in 2007 and then burnt the Central Bank of Iraq. We had him in court in 2008. The Department of Treasury shut the case down, said that they like this macroeconomic policies, leave him alone. It took me 4 years at CENTCOM when I left 101st to go there to get a mission to go get Asawi. The goal was to take Asawi and to get him to give up his Al-Qaeda. At that time, it was Al-Qaeda, and then it was not turned to ISIS yet. Information to get our money back and to put him back in office because the Iraqi government had removed all Sunnis from any political or military venue or even law enforcement. And so they were disenfranchised. That was the mission. If we couldn't get the Iraqi government through the ambassador, because I had to work a lot of pieces on this, we couldn't do that. we would just get him out of the country and get his information. Simultaneously, Ahmadinejad, the president of Iran at the time, currently former president, was invited by Prime Minister Maliki to Iraq. He stole more than $400 million from American provincial reconstruction funds given to Iraq. Both Assawi and Ahmadinejad shoved the majority of their money into Brazil. Now, why this is so significant, okay, is because the Department of Treasury shut my case down against Assawi. Again, an agent, I won't name the agent, told me that they wouldn't allow that because, again, he's an economic guy and they didn't want to mess with him. But when you look at the amount of money that was shipped to Brazil from both Ahmadinejad, who was the former president of Iran / Shia, and Rafi Assawi, a Sunni, that money was earmarked for terrorist groups to operate in South and Central America. And to tell you a little further, if you remember in 2015, all over the news, ISIS flew flags, which is Al-Qaeda, extreme ISIS. They flew flags 1 mile south of El Paso, Texas. And you could see them. The news was reporting it all the time. So now you have that whole historical context of how Brazil was a hub. And before that, Brazil was convinced that we were monitoring everything they did because of Snowden. And then if you fast forward, what happened in 2019 and 20 was all this corruption and scandal started coming out in Brazil. And already, Maduro was running Venezuela with an iron fist. I mean, he was just horrific with that country from 2017 on.
Let me just stop you really, really quickly, William. I want to share something with you all. He had sent me an example of what Maduro is doing to people in genocide. And it's spine shivering. It's disgusting. It's no different than Nazi Germany. It's disgusting. And I have no way of really showing it to you without getting tanked in all directions. So just know that this is no light, fluffy conversation. What's going on here, what's lining up here is serious, and this guy is dark. Go ahead, William, please.
Okay. So if you have the historical context, how Brazil already had a beef with us because of Snowden and his garbage, and how the two thieves, basically, I'm going to call them thieves, Assawi and Ahmadinejad, both Sunni and Shia, both former men of senior politics in their countries, had shoved all this money down in Brazil. You can see how simple it was for ISIS to use some of that money to roll on up right with the Juarez cartel, hang out just south of El Paso, Texas, and fly their flags. Now, cartels don't care because they're going to get paid for it, and they got extra trigger pullers to help them with whatever enforcement they want to do. But if you look at the significance of this took place in 2014 and 15. I warned everybody. No one listened. Now you fast forward to today's date, Venezuela is the primary cause, and I would say about 60 to 65% of the cause of everything from immigration to problems with cartels to problems with terror groups, and it's moving forward into the United States and creating this discontentment throughout the South and Central American region. And where's the United States to help these countries? And to get in there. Colombia couldn't handle all those refugees from Venezuela when they first started crossing the border. The UN wasn't putting any effort into them, just minimal effort. So what are they left with to do? So they're just shoving what they get in their country forward north. And they're putting the blame right back on the United States, where many feel it's the correct place to put it. The reality is that if we went down and tried to arrest Maduro and his cronies through a police action, we could negate a lot of this stuff. We could remove China, Russia, and Iran from that country. We could put the lawfully elected leaders back in charge, let them do their own referendum and their own leadership and voting. And probably Maria Machado would win. Again, she's not part of the People's Will Party, which is a communist group down there. And there would be some kind of peacefulness in the area, quelling the problems in the region. Because now it's a regional issue. And God forbid, when I make WMD stuff, that could potentially be there. confirm or deny it because, respond to destroying nukes during George Bush Sr.'s time as president dealing with Gorbachev. So now you're forward in this, and you can see how many problems will be stopped by dealing with Venezuela and this one unlawfully sitting ruler or dictator of a country that's a murderer. I mean, you could see where the madness would end in so many levels. Venezuelans could go home. A lot of the Cubans could go back. Cuba would calm down. Nicaragua would release the Catholics. Brazil wouldn't be sponsoring people to keep their corrupt president in charge. Because a lot of people get contract money from him, and that's what he was stealing and giving these contracts to, his friends that are helping to keep him as, the president of that country. So we really have a significant problem we can deal with and should have been dealt with for like 2-3 years now, and it hasn't been.
So, William, let me ask you this. What's the attraction to Brazil exactly from your point of view? What's there that they want, anybody wants?
Brazil is one of the most populated countries in South and Central America, has one of the largest militaries, and it has some of the largest ports. So it has an attraction to many countries for a lot of reasons. I mean, you could land a lot of stuff there and start moving it around the country any way you want it, whether it be drugs or human trafficking or military equipment. I mean, you have to think about the significance behind that. The United States has lost its footing. We allowed the Middle East to turn Shia, backed by Iran. That's why the Saudis will not give us oil, not because Biden, didn't get along with the Saudis or didn't make a good deal. It's because he supports Iran, and Iran is supporting a conflict that Saudi Arabia is involved with in Yemen. And all of Iraq was lost as far as Sunnis go. Any Sunnis in authority are gone. There's 14 Middle Eastern countries that are Sunni dominant, and they all own the oil. I mean, so they're not going to help us. And now Venezuela is the only oil-rich country. And since Biden wanted to shut down independent operations of oil and natural gas, now they're looking to Venezuela. And meanwhile, Russia's gone nuts in Ukraine, and that's created a problem and tension with NATO and Russia, and China's backing Russia. Now you have Iran, China, and Russia all sitting in Venezuela. And of course they're going to sponsor terror groups. Of course they're going to sponsor cartels because they do harm to us. And that's what the goal seems to be. When you just look at the rule of law as lost on the streets, and somebody robs a store and people are supposed to just let them go, not say anything to cops. I've never heard of that. That's not how the United States is based. I mean, so now people are starting to turn that corner and say, we've had enough. We've had it. So I'm hopeful that this will start panning out and people will start making complaints to everybody, media, IGs, political officials, military officials, police officials, mayors, governors, everything. And I know that it's difficult, but you can do it on a computer, one a week, or you can do all at once on a shotgun blast while you're sitting at the comfort of your own home.
Maybe we could craft our own documents here and gather everyone and put them out once they're all, like write one good performance document and start sending those out. Yeah, this is speaking of a much, much bigger level of things, because when I went down to Brazil to do the elephant sanctuary thing, I went way up in the middle of the jungle into somewhere, I don't know where, but it was very, very, very remote. All along the way in these remote towns, as far as you could see, there was farming. It's massive. I mean, just massive amounts of it. It's now commercial farming owned by Monsanto. And Brazil is rich in minerals, rich in land, rich in water, all kinds of water. I would be curious who owns the water rights to Brazil. I know Vivendi Universal. That's an entertainment company out of Italy. Vivendi Universal is what we discovered when it was 2004, and we were going after the codex here in the United States, because if we didn't do that, you wouldn't even be able to go to the store right now and buy herbs that you want. You wouldn't be allowed to get a massage without a particular prescription from somebody. They were trying to move that back then. So they rolled that back out through Europe on a rider bill that they had some little sneaky thing with back in 2004, and still they lost by 1 vote. That's how close they were then. But when we researched this, we found out that Vivendi Universal was buying up all the water rights around the world. This is interesting. I'm just giving you like a drop here to feed off of. So, William, let's go back to what you see as the pressing issue with Maduro in Brazil today.
Let me answer that question. So what I see is the very first thing they spoke about is what their true intentions are. And the Brazilian president and Maduro both spoke about the unlawful sanctions by the United States and coalition countries against them. And they think that they can make their own coalition out of South and Central America to have those relieved, to allow Maduro to run his country any way he wants to, and to allow the Brazilian president to continue running his country the way he wants to. Brazilians they're like a powder keg right now, if you want to know. It's such a touch and go thing that people are so angry and upset with this president and the corruption behind him. But the ones that have the TV networks, the money, the companies, and the police and the military are the ones maintaining this guy's power and authority, along with their Supreme Court. So really, he's trying to legitimize himself, legitimize Maduro, which is impossible to do, and fight back against, United States and their overreach and their grasp and all this other garbage. And they're still allowing freedom of movement for cartels and these terrorist groups who are making a lot of money. And terrorist groups are using the money they are funded with to get their butts up here to do something they shouldn't do. And this is where a lot of the problems come into play. Right now in the United States, you have cops that don't know whether they should do an arrest or watch somebody get away with doing something. They don't know which way is going to be the way they need to go with their job. Chicago is a great example. Chicago is 2,500 cops short to come up to 80% strength. Think about that. You have 100% of a police force that has a certain number. Just to get to 80%, they're 2,500 cops short. And that's the murder capital of everything, How do we bridge this gap? And it's simple, by enacting the rule of law. And it comes from the executive branch of government, who runs every agency under the sun. And it is sponsored and promoted by financially the Congress and legally by the Senate. And we don't need to change laws. We just need to enforce the laws that are on the books. And that's not being done. And that's where all this problem is. So let's be honest. If you're in Boise, Idaho, or somewhere, that's innocuous, and there's a terrorist attack there, who's going to respond? And how are they going to respond? And if they catch the people involved with this, are they going to catch them, or are they going to let them go? I mean, are law enforcement going to be able to fire at bad guys that are just slaughtering, defenseless, people, regular citizens? I mean, is this what we're coming to? If anybody remembers the Uvalde Police Department's non-response when the children were being shot by one gunman, okay? Everybody that saw this one gunman, most of the photos show there were two people in the truck, not one. They saw that the BORTAC team from Border Patrol was not allowed to make entry and to stop the killing. And the Uvalde Police Department was ordered to hang back. Why is that? There were two cartel busts a week apart from each other of senior cartel members, one in Mexico and one in the United States. So obviously this guy that was the head of the police department had some kind of involvement with this and allowed children under the age of 10 to get slaughtered by some asswipe. This is the kind of stuff that people see and are sick to their stomach, but nothing's changing. So if you translate that into what's going on south of the border, if it moves into the United States, God forbid something goes down, then what? Are police going to start arresting civilians that arm themselves, or civilians that are out trying to figure out what's going on, or they have family members that are looking for them? Are they not going to be allowed to engage these enemies of the United States, or even just criminals of the United States? I mean, so you have to really look at why I'm saying that a lot of people are starting to turn that corner in this country. They realize these things are getting outrageous. And the focus is not supposed to be on individual groups of people, of like a few hundred around the country, that matter more than everyone else, and that criminals should be able to rule the day. Every country around the world is going to take advantage of that and try to harm the United States, and they'll get their way soon. And I think regular people wake up and they start seeing that. They want to turn the corner. They want to find out, what do I do? How can I help?
Right. I think there's a prolific number of people that really do feel that way. They may be a little bit asleep even there, because I don't think people realize that this is moving. This isn't static. This is happening, and it's happening fast. Just on the news, they were talking about all the Chinese that are coming up, like you said before, alongside the others. They're coming in. So let me ask you this question, because when I saw that on the news today, I thought that's very interesting based on what you'd said in the last interview. Why are the Chinese coming up attached? Are they purposely planting them there? Are they like coming through these southern countries? How is that lining up?
Well, I mean, look at what the reasonings are behind it. What's the reasoning these groups of Chinese might be coming here? More likely than not, it would be what's called disruption. They want to disrupt normal duties. In upstate New York, the Chinese have a compound right near one of the major power grids. A Chinese general and his staff tried to buy property in Florida and make a bio lab down here. I mean, it doesn't take a brain or a rocket scientist to figure out why they're doing that.
Now they're suing though. For that very case in Florida, they turned around and the Chinese are suing to be able to have that space there as of last week.
Good luck. You told me about Lake Tahoe. They built an airport big enough to house 747s coming and going.
Oh, that was in the Adirondacks. Yeah, the Adirondacks in the middle of the woods. And then all of a sudden in Texas as well, they put it up as a wind farm. But in fact, they built a 747 runway.
So again, all of this stuff we're speaking about is on media and in the news. It's open source. It's not classified. But it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out they're trying to put enough assets on the ground to do major damage and major disruption in the United States. That means that if something happens really bad, our response time would be very slow. And a lot could be done with that slow response time. So, I mean, there's reasons behind this, and these stupid cities that want to be, letting shootings happen and all this other stuff adds to that, cartels and flooding us with fentanyl, killing their own customer base off. That's dumb, but it's happening. You have to look at the reasons behind this. What do they know that we don't? And when I say we don't, what I mean is regular people don't. Governments definitely do. Believe me, we have the best intelligence apparatus in the world. By far and away, our people know everything. I mean, they could report on a gnat farting in Africa somewhere that's never been heard of. If it happens.
Monkey Works. If y'all are familiar with Monkey Works, he was doing a sit rep this week about all the people that are the amount of surveillance that's going on the East Coast in the last week. It's just unprecedented. It's never been this much or that many of them.
So it's ridiculous to think that the administration can hide behind that false veil that says, well, I didn't know. Nobody briefed me. Nobody told me. That's a lie. That's an absolute lie. I mean, there is so much going on, and believe me, even if the boss says, or the president says, we got to prioritize the stuff that's really pertinent, there's others in the White House and others throughout the executive branch of government that are being made aware of other things too, and they're reacting to it. They have authorities, they have the means to react to it. But the problem is, you see little to no reaction at all. So why is that happening? What is this administration doing to say that these things can't be stopped? That we can't go and arrest this criminal, Maduro, and free Venezuela back up and stop this immigration crisis. And we can go ahead and get rid of some of these terrorists and cartels and remove some of these adversarial countries from there. Why is that? What's going on that's making that happen? You see, what is the leverage that they have over whoever's in charge? Because apparently, if you're in charge and you have blackmail against you, which most of these people do, apparently they get more scared about that than doing their job. But then it would be the second, third, fourth in command or whoever to make a comment about it. It was brought up to me a week ago. Does the Congress have a right to order the military up to conduct military actions? And the answer is yes. It's in Article 1, Section 4 of the Constitution. Okay? And they do have the right to do that. The problem with the Congress is right now, and the same with the Senate, is they're very inept. There's a lot of talking going on, but no action. Lots of talking. They talk big about Afghanistan, then it drops off the news cycle, and nothing was done. They talk big about Central and South America, the immigration crisis. They go down and visit the border. They say, oh my God, everybody run to the hills. Look at this. And they do nothing. This is where a lot of the problems come in. You have politicians that are afraid to get up and say anything. Maybe some have blackmail, maybe some don't. But I will tell you this. I'll tell you that dereliction of duty, that's their job. They swore an oath to that. They're held accountable under standards for that. So why is no one holding them accountable? I mean, people vote people into these offices and they do nothing.
Because they're all fiction.
Absolutely nothing.
They're in the fiction. What's your take on this lineup, this move? I'll call it a play because it seems like a play of DeSantis in opposition to Trump, but coming into the possibility of standing alongside him. Like, what is Trump going to do about any of this? Nobody seems to be able to do anything. I don't have any confidence in that either.
I mean, I'm not a political expert. I don't know what to say on something like that. I mean, the two of them, they have beef, but I think it's phony beef. I think it's more like, instead of bacon, it's like turkey bacon. That's what I look at it like.
It's another flavor of the same thing is what you're telling me. And the basics here are wake up people, because the people need to come back into how to, not only protect themselves. It's difficult because what you're saying here is there may be the potential for, mayhem, and the mayhem might come from multiple directions. It may be difficult to sort of coordinate something. But in fact, people need to be aware, and they need to start demanding or manding back their rights currently, and demand new people in there. Do something, because right now we're a sitting duck, is what you're saying.
In some ways, we are. I don't want it to be a doom and gloom segment. It's not, but I can tell you that so much wrong has been done. To go over that would be wringing everybody's ears out and making everybody's eyes and head turn red for no reason. The point I'm getting at is that there's a lot that's gone wrong, and there's a lot that should never have happened. And I give you historical context so you understand where some of the other backlash comes from. Because everybody want to know, like, why is Brazil so against the United States? Refer back to Snowden. And that's just the start, the tip of the iceberg. And then look at the monies being transferred and the terror groups and blah, blah, blah. It goes on and on. But at the end of the day, the reality is most of the world needs the United States, not just being the country we are, but to be strong the way we used to be. And that would quell a lot of problems and also support a lot of, just up and coming democratic countries or countries that are having trouble with corrupt governments that are taking money for, granted and not really doing the right thing. And in order to get there, a lot of people have to speak out about things. Some people will try to do things like I did in speaking out to Congress and Senate. I got nowhere. I went to governors. I went to military. I got nowhere. I said, okay. I went to the inspector generals. I may not have gotten anywhere, but I did get a report generated. And I know when Afghanistan withdrawal took place, and I did the IG complaint the day before our troops were killed, I know that made an impact because the Department of Defense called me the same day and shut it down. The very next day, 13 of our service members were killed. So I redid a new IG complaint saying, what the heck's going on? I know that generates reports. And then I've done these court documents. I mean, I've put things out to the media. Most media outlets don't want to report on a lot of this stuff. They'll make a comment if somebody they think is worthy speaks about it. and somebody that has part of the truth speaks about it. But they don't want anyone speaking the whole truth, because that scares them for some reason. I guess it's the ownership of these companies or what have you. So that's where I went to these courts, and I tried to use the court system to do it, and then use the media to put the court documents out there. I'm not here to hide anything. I'm not a lawyer or an expert, but I am somebody that's trying to get my point across, saying this is wrong. This needs to stop. It needs to be fixed. That's your job. I've done everything I can do under the sun. Now I'm going to court and saying, I'm asking the court and a judge to say, please do your job. But even that is difficult. But the great part is, and now it's public record.
That's
so now
right.
People can read about it, and then they can plagiarize. They can take what they want. They can use it. They can do whatever they have to do to communicate with their leaders and all the way up to the White House and make it stink. Because after a while, these politicians cannot walk away from so many constituents. Because it's going to be Larry the plumber that's going to get up and say, I want to be a politician. I've never been blackmailed. And they're going to say, you're in. And Larry's going to get out there and make a big stink, put a lot of congressmen down or senators down or whoever, and make a difference. And that's going to be interesting to see. And that's one of the reasons I believe Trump was picked in 2016 to be president, because he wasn't part of that political rat race. And he wound up doing great in his first 2 years. And afterwards, everybody was trying to destroy him and everything else. And he let the rule of law slip. So I can't forgive him for that. But I can say that, yeah, I know that you had a lot of pressure, but you had your means of dealing with that pressure. You're the president. You're not just some guy that needs to hire a lawyer. And that's what they tried to do, make, being the president a legal thing. That's not the case. The president has the authority to do a lot of things, to include insulate his own office and stop people from doing the wrong thing.
Yeah, it's very curious as to what went on in that 2-year window after the fact, because nothing's really corrected. And in my opinion, and to the point of some of the recent interviews I've done, none of this needed to happen. Ourselves here to this point today, and that self in all necessary. It's not something we can ignore either. It's not something that you can forget about. So, these people are coming in from all directions, and they may or may not speak English. If there's a mass of people that come in that don't speak English and they start to terrorize your town, you might want to learn some Chinese or Spanish soon. It's happening really quickly, and that's not a negative, that's a fact. Just like he said, there is I don't even know what you call it. I'll say it's a compound in upstate New York, where they've set up camp. And do you know, in that compound, even the local sheriffs were not allowed in? How's that? How's that possible? How do they have jurisdiction? Yeah. What is going on there? So who's allowing that to take place? Who's in collusion with that to make that manifest? I know for a fact the Chinese have come here to the U.S. and they have certain people slated as Chinese nationals that are buying up land everywhere. Additionally speaking, they've been moving along into areas like, let's say, the Mennonite community, because they have their own banking system, so they can do a quick sale closure on land in cash very quickly, and it's not really on a record that you see.
I can answer some of what you were getting at, if you like.
Yes.
Well, I'll give you an example of myself. When I was a teenager, in my 18, 19 years old, I worked at Trenton State Prison in New Jersey. Lovely place. And there was a lot of violations that were going on. We had what were called hangouts, which were too many inmates for not enough cells. So they were hangouts. They were out in the middle of where the common areas were throughout the night. And we had bunks out there and everything. And what the supervisor told me, the lieutenant I had, he said, unless there's an actual catastrophe, nothing will change. Well, we had an inmate hang himself, and they did it in an open bay area. And it turns out the guards weren't doing their shift correctly. So it turned into a big stink. So next thing you know, a week later, there were no more hangouts. We had enough cells for everybody all of a sudden. So it was at a smaller level, of course, in a catastrophe manner. Now, 9/11 was like a wake-up call for everybody, and it was a huge catastrophe, very bad in a lot of ways. Loss of life, loss of economy, and loss of other lives in other countries because of it for a long time. And now, if something else happens like that, not these, I know these shootings are horrible, but not just in small areas, but if something big happens, that's when things will change. That's when people will stand up and do what they're doing. The only way to circumvent that is to get those in politics right now in Congress and Senate, more the Congress than anywhere, to get up and do things, sponsor bills and do things. People are sending these mercenary groups to Afghanistan since we pulled out, to pull people out of there that they know, loved ones, friends, family, that are U.S. citizens. That's the government's job, and they're not doing it. So the Congress needs to stand up and pass a bill that says, hey, we need to go get our folks. That's the executive branch job. Go do it. Or the Congress can stand up, activate military units, and say, go get our people. Nobody's doing these things, but they will. I guarantee you they will. If enough voices go up there, they will. Especially if there's media involvement, whether it's media like ours or whether it's the big three, CBS, NBC, or ABC. Doesn't matter. There will be consequences. And we're not the only ones that feel this way. There are people in many countries around the world that want us to stand up and do what we always do. They want us to come back to normal. I mean, think about it. A third world country, people come here for a better life, and because of what's going on now, they go back to the country they were in, which they're in mortal jeopardy. That's pretty scary, to say that's the United States. That's crazy. So again, I'm just saying we have to stand up. We have to be forthright and do things. It doesn't mean you got to go running down to D.C. and be in person, but you can send things on the emails, on internet. You can go ahead and call friends. You can talk to church groups. You can talk to schools. You can talk to governors, mayors, politicians, anybody, to get groups up to start sending these things up, saying we have to do this. And it doesn't matter what your beef is with what I'm saying. Any one of those beefs or other things that you have wrong, you have to bring those up to make them accountable, to fix that, or make an attempt at least.
Well, do you really think the cartels can be stopped at this point? They seem to have a foothold.
Cartels could easily be stopped. They could have been stopped a long time ago.
Okay.
We have the means to do that. That's not the problem. The problem is that they're allowed to do this. Right now, Mexican government is on board with the Juarez cartel. And they're the kingpin. So the strongest cartel is who they work with. I hate to say it, but it's like their quid pro quo, if you want to call it that.
Right.
But the point I'm getting at is that these types of deals are not conducive to normal people living. And there's going to be a means to an end. Nobody really stopped and asked the question why fentanyl is such a popular drug to send to the United States. How many users of drugs use fentanyl on a regular basis? I don't think very many. So what's the point of that drug? It's not a designer drug. What's the point of having that drug here other than to kill? Unless I miss my guess. Law enforcement winds up coming into contact with it. You have dead officers. People spread it around. You have dead people everywhere. Anybody that's had any kind of contact with fentanyl, I think it's less than 10% have lived. So what is the point of fentanyl being a drug of choice sent by the cartels here? What would be the reason behind it? These are questions you have to ask, and you have to come up with answers. I mean, I'm not going to give you an answer that you're going to be satisfied with, but you can come up with your own answers. It's like sending poison to a country. Well, what's the point of sending poison to a country other than to soften them up?
Yeah. And have it in waiting for anything that may go down. But see, what you're talking about also is you're saying you're mentioning different factions, you're mentioning different countries, people from different countries, different languages. That's a lot of distractive chaos right there. It'll come in and be from anywhere. It could come up from the middle. I mean, you know something about how the world runs, and you know the problem we had with the Chinese coming in through Vancouver, correct?
Yes.
Can you speak to that for a minute?
I mean, they've been crossing the border over in Vancouver for a long time. And in that area of the United States, we have Bangor Naval Station, which holds Trident nuclear missile subs. And then we have Fort Lewis, which is a Corps headquarters. And we have other means to get onto major thoroughways, like I-5 corridor all the way down south to Mexico, or other major roadways going out east. And we have Air Force bases and other things. So there's a lot of reason to doing that. Now, the Vancouver corridor also extends up toward Alaska, if you want to know, even though it's kind of a rugged route, it still can go that direction, by ground. So again, Alaska is our state, so we have another issue going on there. The Canadians, I don't know exactly what their Border Patrol's orders are, but I know they've stepped up their game recently, so that's a good thing. But a lot of these problems that you're hearing me talk about, most of them, to include our own internal problems, where there's now racism when there really isn't, and there's now specialty groups when there really wasn't, and there shouldn't be.
Right.
These kinds of things have created fighting between ourselves, and everything from that all the way to international policy, to drug cartels, terrorists, and to adversarial countries, all stems from the executive branch of government. The executive branch is responsible for the Department of Justice, is responsible for the FBI, ATF, DEA, U.S. Marshals, everything, all the way down the line. Department of Energy, Department of Agriculture, CDC, which dealt with, COVID-19 in a porous fashion. So you can see where all of this really stems from the federal government, from the executive branch. And there's not been a means to fix it. The checks and balances between the Congress, Senate, and then the Supreme Court are not there. And they're either not there because no one's sponsoring anything, or the courts aren't listening to anything, or both.
Or the courts are closed and they aren't listening. It's just a game. So on the note of what you were saying regarding Maduro going down there, let's say that we continue our paralysis of function. What happens after today with Maduro and the president of Brazil, and now what? Where does that then extend back to? Russia? Does it extend back to the Middle East? I mean, what's the outcome of that?
The outcome is that both countries will sign agreements against the United States and coalition. There will be a lot of denied business and denied communication between the United States and these countries by them, and then they'll invite the Russians and Chinese in to help support them monetarily because of the United States not being there anymore. That's exactly what's going to happen, and that's been happening in Venezuela, and Brazil is going to be the next country, because now you got a corrupt president down there that stole a ton of money and sweetheart dealed a bunch of people, through bribes and what, and they're all backing him. So now they're all going to turn. He's going to invite him, going to give him protection and allow him to run the country. For some 75 years old, you would think that they would be a little bit more wiser.
Well, that that depends if they can even stand up straight or ride a bicycle or anything else. We have a situation as if we have a ghost government going on at the moment. It's not there. It doesn't exist because it's not truly functioning on behalf of the people. And so your solution is for everybody to reach out and start mandating to their congressmen and their senators and to the people that are playing the game anyway.
The only way to do it's through numbers.
Is that something you've seen repeatedly throughout your work in the field?
Yes, matter of fact, it is. When one or two people say it, they can shut them down. They can talk about their credibility. They can say they're garbage, or they can produce other information that's more important to people, that might even change their minds, from one or two people speaking about it. We talked about the diversion that this White House had done recently with something in regards to discussions about the limited amount of oil coming from Venezuela, and how Saudi Arabia is not giving us oil at all. And that was some issue about an argument between the president couldn't come to an agreement with the Saudis, and that's not the reason. reason is because the president abandoned the Saudis with the fight with the Houthi rebels in Yemen and is siding with Iran. So, I mean, they can say what they want to say to misdirect people, but...
Well, if he's siding with Iran, then that's kind of a setup back through Russia and China, isn't it?
Well, again, the Iranians are friendly with the Russians and Chinese. So now we're siding with Iran and trying to do the Iran deal all over again. I mean, Israel's being left out of the loop on a lot of stuff, which, again, Israel has a right to defend itself. It's a small country, and they don't really have a lot of support right now in the White House either. So there's a whole big thing about the Palestinians now being talked about, which I don't want to get into that. It's off track. But, I mean, there's a lot that's going on that we're not involved with anymore. Matter of fact, when we used to be involved with things and we used to be adversarial with people, that was one thing, and at least we showed our presence there. Now we're not even there to show our presence. So, if you're sitting at a table with the Russians, Chinese, and the American seat is empty, who are you going to go with? Because an empty seat's not going to give you money. An empty seat's not going to give you, trade rights or, purchase contracts or anything else like that. But the people that are there are going to give it to you. So that's one of our biggest downfalls now is we're not there anymore. We're just not doing anything with these people anymore.
Yeah, we're not at the table for anything. Well, we can't really be at the table for anything, can we? So the point is the American military is doing this giant sweep over the East Coast currently, in this week anyway. Do you know anything about that?
It's an honor and it's a Memorial Day, and it's also a show of force. But now we're showing our military might, sort of like Russia with its parades, or North Korea or China with its parades.
But I mean, this is like intelligence gathering, like lots of intelligence planes and gathering going over.
I don't think so. I think, if they're doing intelligence gathering, it's for other reasons, not in that respect. Honestly, the U.S. military, in a lot of ways, hasn't been trusted with domestic intelligence gathering for a long time. We have our own other agencies that do that. But we do, incursions for, natural disasters with troops and military equipment, or, catastrophes or catastrophic incidents, and also for defense purposes. That's exactly where the military comes into play. But mostly, when it's a state issue, it's a state called up National Guard, not a federal movement, unless it's for, again, training purposes, or to, like today is Memorial Day. We don't say Happy Memorial Day. We honor Memorial Day for those that have fallen in combat, for those they left behind, and for those that are wounded beyond, normal capabilities and quality of life. So, I mean, there's a lot that went on with this Memorial Day. I don't know how these commanders are today in the military, but, the prior commanders at the end of the Obama administration and through a lot of Trump's administration were very vocal into this political game, and that's not what you put the uniform on for. I mean, you're not in a political game. You're not there to support, rights of one group over another. I mean, that's not how the military is done, and that's what the regulations say you can't do. But they do it. I don't know if this newer generation of officers that have moved up have maybe gone back to a little bit more standards, and hopefully they have.
Well, I'd like to put out to the chat right now, because there's a chat going on here, William, that you can't see anymore. Does anyone have a question they want to pose to him? If you want to ask him a question from the last interview, I know two people had questions, and then if you're here again tonight and you're listening, or you might have a question for him, we have the ability to kind of answer some of those from before if you'd like. So people are saying different things in the chat, which he'll see again later in a replay, but he can't see it here, so I'd have to say it to him. But I think that we have, the bigger question is, what interest does China play in the United States mostly? I mean, I know they might come back for the bonds. They own a lot of land here already, despite other people coming in to buy more land, but what's the point? It's not like their area isn't quite large.
China is one of these countries that a lot of their leadership believes in the long-term strategies. And one of their primary strategies against the United States is economic strategy. Why go to war and waste troops and assets and tons of money when you could just bankrupt the other side? And then if we have to borrow from China or go to China for, debt, then they kind of own us in a lot of ways. That's kind of how I see it. I mean, that's my personal opinion.
So that would be an even more important reason to be gold backed and have the debt go away. See, there's this pending RV thing going on in the world too, and that also can be its own distraction and or psyop on top of all this. Like, hey, this saving grace is coming, and it'll end the day of debt ceiling, or will it? Is it even something, that could be going on in the roost to save the people when in fact the other things are marching forward in the background and people don't even realize it. So China could be inching up on people in terms of what you're calling out as, destroying an economy or assisting in the destruction of an economy, so that then they were reliant upon them as well. So we'd be reliant upon somebody if we can't produce our own energies. We have energy.
This is true, but again, if you look at China spends such a huge budget on their military, which is a real second-rate military, I'll be honest. But they've spent so much to try to spread this military out, take over these unknown islands all around the South Pacific, to have their influence out, to try to get their diggers into the Middle East and to Africa, to pull out precious minerals, and other things. They've gone and really, in a lot of ways, overextended themselves. So they're in a hurting way as well economically from their plan. Also, the idea that they control Hong Kong, which has the Chinese stock market now, isn't really paying off a lot. But a lot of Chinese are extreme rich people. I mean, you have many Chinese that are billionaires. Interestingly enough, the Chinese government goes back on them like oligarchs from Russia. Mm-hmm. So when Russia asks China, buy our oil, China's buying the oil. But the problem with buying that oil is China doesn't have a great deal of money they're spending on Russia. And the Russians aren't going to use Chinese equipment that's known, like Chinese tanks or Chinese, aircraft or other systems that are big that can be seen, because they're really flawed. But the smaller arms stuff, they'll probably do a lot of sales for. So they might trade, military equipment for fuel from Russia. So I mean, that's one of their aspects. And the other part is, of course, they're all down in South and Central America, trying to get a foothold there and get whatever they can out of that. And our Achilles heel is the Panama Canal, obviously. That's a big deal.
Yeah. Yeah, Panama just had a 6.6 earthquake the other day, too. We're having all kinds of interesting other disruptions that might come up, whether you expect it or not. And that could weaken an infrastructure as well. That could put people in trouble.
That's correct. If we don't respond to that in a good way, there could be problems. That's another thing that's on the plate right now, but it's not a Venezuela issue. That's a China-Panama issue right now.
Well, let me ask you this. In your line of work, when you were present there, how did you witness countries trusting one another in order to contract safely or with any means of forward movement that they could count on? How did they come into joinder and contract with trust, not a trust, but rather with trust, establishing trust?
Well, really, there's not trust, but what there was blue chip leverage. Let's just say that. So, for example, I'll give you Iraq as an example, because I was there and I know all about that. In Iraq, President Bush Jr. had made a deal about the Iraqi government. Once again, the United States would be paid back war and paid reconstruction. We really didn't destroy much of the country. It was already destroyed when they started producing and pumping oil. That repayment program was to be up to 75%. Mm-hmm. But then Obama took over as president, and that went by the way of the dodo. So now the Iraqi government didn't have to pay back anything. And all of a sudden, they thought it would be a great idea to go ahead and, start turning everything Shia and get rid of the Sunnis. And Obama was on board with that. We talked about that before.
Mm-hmm.
So the Iraqis really had no blue chip over them. Under President Bush Jr., they did, because they owed money for war reparations. That's one example. Another example was Turkey. Turkey decided in 2008 they were going to build a dam. And I talked about snowpack assessments and snow shed from the mountains in Turkey that would allow water to flow in the Tigris River from Turkey through Iraq. Well, they were going to dam it up to keep it for themselves. Excuse me. So what happened was a lot of us got together with the State Department and then had to have them put pressure on Turkey. And we have military bases in Turkey, and Turkey got a lot of money from the United States. So we had a huge deal of leverage over them to tell them not to do that. So this is the types of trust you're dealing with. Not only are they a NATO ally, but they're also what's called the SOFA agreement. SOFA is a status of forces agreement, which deals with military stuff. But there's other economic and Department of State contracts. I'm not familiar with the terminologies or the details behind them, but they make for basically like an arrangement between the countries. And the most recent one I'll give you an example of is Dominican Republic. So Dominican Republic recently was given $11 billion worth of bonds to do infrastructure and reconstruction. And that infrastructure reconstruction was supposed to also bolster their law enforcement and others. Well, that $11 billion went missing as soon as it was given to the Dominican Republic government.
Wow.
Back in 2018. And that's a problem now because that money's missing. But the Dominican Republic is still our friends, quote unquote, because we have leverage over them on all the investments we had, not including the money that's missing. Puerto Rico was always considered like a satellite country of the United States. Hurricane Irma hit. For some reason, we gave them $91 billion with a B. And that country could be rebuilt 10 times over for less money than that. And of course, that money went missing. And myself and others got involved with saying, where'd that money go? Let's figure this out. Because you have citizens talking about nobody's got the money. No one's building anything. And you had contractors coming out on every social platform they could that they're down in Puerto Rico and nobody's paid them and no one has shipped their equipment and they can't do anything. So when we started going into that, finally the Trump administration went in and got, I think, $2 billion back. But then the rest of the money was a question mark, like where'd it go? So nobody ever counted for the other, 89 billion. It turned out to be 87 billion by 2020. And then COVID hit. So now no questions were asked because everyone was locked down. But again, these are countries, these are the ways that countries are kind of like agreeable with each other and have an agreement with each other to actually get them to be bolstered. So we get a base in, say, Turkey, and we bolster their country. That's kind of how the deals are done.
That's interesting. From what you saw in the field, how did you witness the Middle Eastern countries among themselves? Did they get along? Did they work together in certain ways, or did you find the majority of it just complete chaos because of outside influences?
What I found was most of the countries that were Sunni dominant, they operated just fine. The Shia dominant countries did not. I noticed that when the Middle East under Obama started turning Shia, backed by Iran, that there was chaos. Civil war in Syria, which is still not stopped to this day. Iraq imploding on itself, regardless of what the media says, because of the disenfranchisement of all the Sunnis. And that went from Al-Qaeda, then they turned to ISIS. You're seeing many of the Middle Eastern countries that are oil rich denying Biden any access to their oil because of his policies about Iran and the Shia. And we saw what happened in Egypt when Mubarak was replaced by Morsi, who runs the Muslim Brotherhood, which is an Iranian-backed terrorist group, basically. And General al-Sisi, who's a Muslim Sunni, finally took the country back from him by force, which is lucky because then that's the Suez Canal that we're talking about. That would be another choke point of very vital interest to us. So, I mean, you see how these things start to play out in the Middle East. Yemen is still at war. Their government's still fighting these Houthi rebels being backed by Iran. And that's one of the sore spots. So you really have to ask, how did we go from a stable Middle East under George Bush Jr. to an out of control Middle East under Obama. What happened, And then while that chaos was going on, Russia invaded Georgia and took Georgia over and made it a satellite country. And then they tried to annex the Crimea, I mean, it was one thing after another worldwide, and it just became a real powder keg. And Syria, of course, the Russians were in Syria and there were problems there. And then, of course, that's when our little idiot Snowden came out with his quote-unquote great information. I got a bunch of top-secret documents. I really don't know what they are, but let me give it to the Brazilian news and tell them. That was just so dumb that we didn't go after him and fight that whole thing. We really alienated Brazil at that time. And you have to remember that Venezuela is in the middle of our hemisphere, just below Central America. So the American hemisphere is really compromised in a lot of ways. I mean, they literally could walk into the United States at this point and have been doing so. So when you talk adversaries, you really have a commonality of a threat there.
And nuclear weaponry that may be stashed down there as well, is what you're also speaking of. That we don't really have they may have an idea of what's going on down there, but no one's doing anything with it at the moment. If we can't handle the border, I don't have a lot of confidence in nuclear weaponry.
It's not just nukes. I mean, you have to look, weapons of mass destruction, if they're down there, the whole point is to confirm or deny it. It could be a big hoax. I mean, not hoax, but a big farce. There might not be anything there. But the point is, you have to be able to confirm or deny it when there is talk out there in open source land, like all through media outlets and all, claiming that it's there. And there's a potential that it is there, whether it's remnants from the old Soviet Union in the late 80s, early 90s for the destruction of the missiles or something new. We have no knowledge of it. There's no way to confirm or deny anything at this point because we have a hands-off policy. And that's unacceptable. That's not working at this point. And Maduro, I mean, if he's willing to kill thousands of his own people and just, churn them up at meat grinders and bury them as fertilizer, I mean, what chance do countries around him or us have against him if he decides, well, I've got something cool, I'm going to set it off, I'm going to send one of these little terrorist groups up through this cartel that I control and let them go ahead and set themselves off, maybe with whatever. It doesn't matter. I mean, that's the kind of fear that really should be gripping national defense at this point to look into these things. The NIA, CIA, DEA, other agencies as well. I mean, there should be a grandiose effort to find out if any of this is true and to nip it in the bud before something does happen. And that's the only reason I brought it up. It was an open source, forum. I said, why can't we confirm or deny that?
And then, of course, they sent somebody down there right away and then had to backtrack on that as well. But you're not hearing anything about, we never hear much of anything in this administration. But since this administration is kind of like a ghost administration anyway, I wouldn't expect the United States government to come out and speak about the meeting you're talking about that's happening today in Brazil. And you see, far-reaching implications from that very meeting. What do you feel about Russia as a whole from when you were working in you were actually in the theater and now? What is the difference in play?
I'll give you an example. You remember the Boston bombings from the marathon?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, two Chechens, which in Russia they have a problem with Chechen rebels, they do, and they're terrorist groups there. The Russians advised the FBI and the Obama administration 6 months before the bombings. 6 months. And it's open source. You can go look it up yourself. It's on the news. Okay, 6 months beforehand. And they warned us 3 months beforehand. And we did nothing. We did nothing. And what it caused is it caused that bombing for no good reason. And here, I'll give you a better tidbit. You want to hear some personal news on that?
Sure. Let's hear that.
I found out, my wife and I, when we do exercise, I found out one of the houses we walk by, which is just down the road, and we live right next to MacDill Air Force Base. I found out that the Tsarnaevs, the ones that did the Boston bombing, their uncle was moved down here by the FBI. He's a few houses down from me.
What?
And
really?
His daughter, who was 12 years old at the time, 3 years ago, was arrested for brandishing a knife and trying to stab a kid at a local, after school thing down here at the Queen Doster Rec Center. And that's how I found out that he was down here. And I notified the state governor, which was Rick Scott, and I notified Pam Bondi, who was Attorney General at the time. Are you aware of this? Nobody in the government of the state knew anything about that person being put here by the FBI. Right next to MacDill Air Force Base.
That's weird. Why would they be moved down there?
You tell me.
Yeah. What is that about?
What common sense is that?
Wow. That's as much common sense as allowing people in to buy land in land. So, yeah, that doesn't jive. You know, there's a fella out there named Dutch Sense, and I keep talking about him. And Dutch and all the energy that's generated out of the military bases and what that's doing to how it may correlate with the earthquakes and the fires that are going on. So he's talking about energy coming up from the earth, not top down, but from the earth. In addition, he was measuring these laser type beams that are coming up from some of those military bases over there where you are, and being able to actually capture that in an image. And what is that? And so that's what his question is. What is that? What's going on with that? And I've seen it. I mean, I've seen the picture even. It's really interesting, whatever's going on everywhere. Not sure what they're doing or why they're doing it, but can't imagine that would have I don't know what that would be leading to. In other words, of course, there's a lot of things they're doing we don't know, but you're standing up on logic and, let's say, the right of law and proper functioning upon your oath when you entered. But I think there's a lot of people that may be compromised at this point in our government system because it doesn't seem to be working for the people or with the people. It seems to be diametrically opposed to the people since we went through that whole long charade of putting us at home. And, you know, that was a very positive effect for a lot of people, changed their lives in many ways. But the next step is what you're calling out right now is a need for a wake-up call. And that wake-up call is a growing world theater that leaves us without potential resources as well as the unknown. I'll leave it at that.
Do you know how simple it would be to fix this country?
No, tell me. How simple would it be? Because I'd like to know. If we can do it, let's do it.
30 days or less, you could actually fix the country.
Okay, how?
If you're a president and you want to do it.
Oh.
It's really simple. So if you're president of the United States and you want to fix this country, many of the executive branch offices, and I'm talking about everything from the IRS to the FBI to Justice to many of these agencies, you have a lot of good people working there. And then you have these people in key positions and leadership positions that are doing the wrong thing. And they're either shielding it or making their people shut up because they'll lose their job. So to fix it, the president would just have to do a series of executive orders to quell the corruption in the executive branch of government. You'd have to charge a few people, bust a few people, and this includes the media, by the way, through the FCC. You'd have to fine some of the media outlets, and you'd have to charge criminally some of the media outlets that have incited violence and riots. Now, that's just a few people being charged, and the rest will fall in line. And the only way the government understands anything is by a no later than date. So the executive orders are shotgun blasted to all the agencies with a response from a person that has the authorities to make sure that happens. They have a 24-hour window to respond to that document, and they have 30 days to give a status update. And once it's done, then the rest that are dirty in the government and the executive branch will fall by the wayside. What does that mean? That means that you would have the executive branch of government running like it's supposed to, following the rule of law, which would trickle down to all the states. then law enforcement and governments and fire rescue could all do their jobs without fear of reprisal, repercussions, lawsuits, any of the other garbage that's going on today. Schools could be run right so children could get a right education, not something whacked out that they're doing today. That's how simple it could be to fix this massive government problem. It would start with the executive branch on down.
All right.
So
that means we have to point there as a means of unraveling or pressure anyway to spell out the truth. But they haven't been honest so far. So how do we get heard? You're an example of.
Yeah, I'm talking about another president, not this current administration.
Okay.
For example, with President Trump, I'm not saying I'm a Trump fan. Believe me, I'm not. But the point is with President Trump, he issued an order in 2017. He said, if there are any illegal aliens that are criminal record illegal aliens, they are to be the priority of work to be removed or to be arrested and detained. And by the time his order left the White House and got down somewhere in Texas, a sergeant in the U.S. Army that had served several tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, him and his family were on that list. So somebody along the line changed that order just to make the president look bad. Yeah. At the expense of this family and this soldier that did a great job. And that's one minor example of how these orders can become and get affected and move down and impact people in the most negative light.
Well,
and that's what happened with President Trump under just that one order. And of course, all we ever saw with Trump was impeachment this, impeachment that. My God, the country wasn't running because he had to lawyer up because of impeachment. It was ridiculous. He didn't do the right thing, and neither did the people in the Congress or Senate. But people like Adam Schiff that lied under oath in the impeachment hearing are still serving today and should be charged criminally. But he's not. This is odd.
Yeah, it smells of something. And, we in the quantum world and Russell J. Gould, he ended up syntaxing some of the orders that came toward the police and to the sheriffs, and the orders supposedly were from Trump, but he may not have written that himself. Just like you said a minute ago, that may have changed in hand. And so what Russell found is that by the grammar styling and what happened, it actually negated what was on the paper and instead gave the police and the sheriffs complete right to use force against the people that by any means. And that could even be entering your home or without just cause or anything. And that too, it's been put out, it reads one way, but the truth is when you break it down, it reads an entirely different message. And that message is what went out.
Bottom line up front right now is you're seeing Maduro meeting with Lula Silva, and they're concocting a deal. They told the media what they're doing immediately, and they weren't lying. They're going to work together to try to get rid of the United States. That's what they're saying, basically. And this is a real problem. And, our news agencies obviously aren't reporting on that. So there's got to be some kind of, effort there to shut down any kind of reporting on that, or to slow it down, or to minimize it. Let's do this with Brazil and Maduro and Lula, but then we'll go right away to the Indy 500 or NASCAR or something else. Anything to change your tune on that, to minimize that story as being a threat. And obviously you and anybody with any common sense knows it's a threat. Because people individually are very smart and they're very common sensible for the most part. It's when they get into groups and they have a group leader leading them down a path, they become sheep and docile and they become ignorant to it. And that's the whole goal of PSYOPs and using the media to the government's advantage. Bottom line up front is that Biden and his kid are both caught with taking money from China, with the Burisma scandal, with all this other stuff, that they should be criminally charged with. But that gets so minimized that nobody really knows what's going on with that. But one person who's not part of that clique, that organization, does something wrong, like the Marine on the subway in New York being charged with murder, for trying to save passengers from some nut job. I mean, he's front page news. So you can see where the priorities lie, and until we start educating each other, and that's why I keep saying, go to groups, go to churches, schools, who cares, supermarkets, friends, social media, who cares? Get the true message out. Get the truth as far as you know it out. To stop letting all this misdirection and false narratives come out and be the rule of the day. I mean, we can rule our own destiny, our own fate. All we have to do is just research just for a minute. We can find out what's true or false for the most part.
That's right. That's right. The power is really in the people's hands if they will stand up and take it. But, when we had the pandemic, it made people lazy and apathetic more so than ever. It's nice to see people free to move about and conduct creative ideas and commerce again. However, it really did set us back in a way as well. And now it's time for people to wake up, because what you're saying is there's bad kids in the class out there that basically want to rule the class and rule you and ruin your day. And if what you shared with me is any indication of Maduro's conviction to his own volition, that's a pretty disgusting volition. And it's horrific, honestly. If people need to wake up, because if that's coming here,
you see what kind of animal he is.
It's beyond war crimes. It's totally disgusting, and people don't need that.
With one piece of information that I didn't bring up because it was not part of the Maduro thing, but I'll tell you now since we brought China up. In China, there's a democratic movement. Mongolians and people from Zhejiang province and Hong Kong, independent free. And this movement has become more aggressively, apparently more financially. Somebody or a lot of people are financing these democratic movements over there. So now China issued an order today that said there's a new strain of COVID coming out, and they're going to conduct lockdowns again. This is what they're doing to shut down these democratic movements because they can't get a handle on it otherwise. They've tried other means. They've tried killing folks. They've tried arresting them. They've tried shutting down networks, social media apps, phones, everything. And it's not working. So now they're saying that there's another COVID and they're going to conduct a draconian lockdown again. So that's food for thought, just so you understand the current steady state in China.
Yeah, and so wherever it works for them, you just won't be able to move. You won't be able to go about. And if they control the energy grids or have a hand in the destruction of an energy grid, hey, they say it only takes 9 to go down in the United States to cripple this country. And we apparently don't have the most up-to-date energy grid. So we have an opportunity in front of us, I think, and I appreciate your coming back to share this very important update regarding Maduro and what he's up to and why, and the backstory to that, so people have a bigger picture of the theater in its play out, because we get insulated here. We don't get real world news. We don't hear what many other countries even hear, and so we become a little bit self-centered in our focus toward what we're doing, but this is important. So William Kotel, everybody, I want to say super shout out, give him a high five, say hello, say thank you, because he's really, really dedicated his life to doing what is correct. And he asks people to stop and correct regularly. So I would just want to say thank you for being here. Do you have any closing thoughts that you want to share with everyone?
Just one thing. I'm going to tell you, everybody, right now, I'm not trying to be Mr. Doom and Gloom. I'm trying to just give you the facts. Hopefully you understand that there is a silver lining in a lot of this and you can move forward. But the hardest thing that anyone will ever do in their entire lives is trying to do the right thing. It is the hardest thing. You'll lose friends. You'll lose credibility. You'll lose all kinds of stuff in just trying to do the right thing. But in the end of the day, I think it's worth it, in my opinion, because I see myself and I know I did. I made effort. I tried. I did the right thing, and I was stomped for it. And I feel good about that stomping because usually you're judged by the size of your enemies more than the size of your friends. And that's something just to take to heart. So hopefully that's at least a positive outcome to this discussion.
Thank you. You know, after our last talk, I got bombarded with a bunch of people that went back and they came up with all kinds of information on Flynn, and I think Michael Jaco and was it Mike Gill? They did a thing with Flynn down there in Florida. They gathered somewhere. So we stirred the pot a little bit, and perhaps rightfully so, because maybe the narrative has been all rosy about him all this time, but in fact, Russell court-martialed him. You came out with everything that you said about him last time, and then all these other people came out of the woodwork after that to basically take your information and carry it even further. So this is important, folks. Sorry for the feedback, but this is important. And I just want to say thank you again, William, for your service. Thank you to being here, and thank you personally. So, all right, everybody, go jolly. Go forth, and maybe we can come together another time to discuss a little bit about how maybe to craft the right document that might shake and rattle the house up there. So thank you very much, William.
Thank you all very much. I hope I didn't bore anyone.
I doubt that. It's always insightful. I mean, how do you argue with somebody's firsthand knowledge all the time that's been in it? It's amazing. We don't get to have these kinds of conversations every day. So thank you. Appreciate that. All right.
Very well.
We'll sign off, and we'll talk to you again soon, William, with the next update. All right, everybody. Have a good night. Good night. Good night, everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm going to comment on this another time. It's late for you, and we've gone a long time. So thank you for staying with us, and thank you for listening. And please share and like. Go jolly.